Okay, good morning, everybody. Great to see you all. As Kayla said, my name's Ian Bailey. I go by the title of Professor of Environmental Politics at the University of Plymouth. And I do most of my research on climate and energy policy in the UK and other contexts. I'm also part of the Devon Net Zero Task Force, so I've been involved in kind of helping to design and construct some of the activities that have, or think about what sort of activities are necessary for the, or helpful via the Citizens Assembly. I think we discovered a few minutes ago that there was some element of overlap between what Johnny and I were going to be talking about. So we're going to try to minimize that, but you'll see from the title there that I'd like to spend a bit of time just talking through with you about some of this socioeconomics of wind energy, a bit of overview, but I'm going to focus more on Cornwall's experience, lived experiences with onshore wind energy, partly because that's some of what I research, but also because I have to confess that I'm not a Devonian. I live just over the hill from where this turbine is, a place called Bacadden. And so some quite kind of mixing of personal experiences and also professional research experiences that hopefully will inform some of your discussions about onshore wind energy. Now, as I said, Johnny covered some of the things that I was going to talk about initially. And I guess one reassuring thing is that we're actually looking, we're referencing the same sources for this, the Vivid Economics report on the potential benefits of the expansion of onshore wind in the UK. So the kind of the starting point for that, as much as anything else, is that there's this target of the UK may need up to 35 gigawatts additional onshore wind by 2035 in order to meet the net zero emissions target at least cost. And that's particularly in relation to things like the increase in uptake of electric vehicles and the electrification of heat systems. The benefits, in terms of employment are, as Johnny described, 31,000 when one combines direct and indirect, and potential reductions in household electricity prices. But one of the things that, without taking a kind of too negative view of it, but based on this, on the same report, what might that actually translate into in terms of jobs and increased value to the economy just within Devon, rather than giving the national figures. And it is really difficult to estimate these things. It kind of really depends on what decisions Devon makes with regard to onshore wind energy. But based on the estimates in the report, the number of jobs, additional jobs in the economy, might be somewhere in the region of 350. And that maybe doesn't take into account all the indirect employment that might be generated by an expansion of the sector. And in terms of the overall increase in productivity, uplift to the economy, around about 0.1% increase in gross value added. So I guess one of the kind of the messages that one might take out of that is that there are economic opportunities from the expansion of onshore wind. If one was putting it in game show type language, it might be smile money rather than necessarily life-changing money. But just with the same caveat as before, that a lot depends on what sort of decisions are made with regard to the extent of expansion of onshore wind. And I just, before I move on to Cornwall's experience, reiterate what Johnny also said about the importance of a portfolio of technologies, and particularly in the southwest of the marine sector. So let's come on and talk about Cornwall's experiences with onshore wind energy, which, for those of you who are not familiar with it, Cornwall underwent quite a rapid expansion in its onshore wind between really 2010 and 2015. The map that you'll see there, the blue ones will give you an insight into the number of operating wind turbines across the county. 518 at the count in 2019 data from Cornwall County Council, generating just kind of 0.14 gigawatts. Is that figure right? Yes, I think it is, of electricity. Now, the story, apart from anything else, that it wasn't an entirely harmonious one. You'll see there was lots of applications there, 770 applications, of which around about a third, a quarter were refused, declined by local planning committees, and another nearly 200 withdrawn. It's also quite a diverse range of types of onshore wind facility, ranging from the larger multi-turbine 100-meter plus to tip of the turbine, of the actual blade of the turbines, places like Carl and Cross and Delabole, the UK's first onshore wind farm, down to quite a large number of 15 to 50-meter size individual turbines. But it created, well, let me go back a little bit and say, so how did this wind rush within Cornwall, onshore wind rush in Cornwall, take place? Really driven by a couple of factors. The first was the introduction of the UK feed-in tariff system in 2010. So what essentially that did is it provided a premium payment, a guaranteed premium payment for a guaranteed number of years, normally 25 years, for new renewable electricity generated for relatively small installations. Those are under 5 megawatts in capacity. So it wasn't looking at the large wind farms, it was kind of the smaller individual turbine scale of development, or 2 or 3 turbine scale of development. The second driving factor for that was the introduction in 2012 of a new national planning policy framework, which was highly supportive, giving highly supportive signals and guidance to local planning authorities, basically making it more difficult for local planning authorities to refuse planning permission for applications for onshore wind energy. Now, I might come back to or just remind myself of the second 2 bullet points in a few moments' time, or return to them. But those are the 2 driving factors: financial premiums and a supportive policy framework. So, what were community attitudes? What kind of the dynamics of conversation around onshore wind as a result of Cornwall being the subject of all these applications? And the answer to that is that it was very mixed. I think the first thing one can say is that a lot of communities were quite divided in their views on onshore wind energy. But those people who were kind of more unsettled by it particularly had difficulties with the scale and the speed of landscape transformation. People reporting that it gave insufficient time for local people to adjust to the sorts of changes that were taking place, in many cases in predominantly rural areas. There was also an awful lot of criticism about what was described as the littering of the landscape as a consequence of the feed-in tariff targeting smaller projects, and therefore you get individual turbine applications rather than rather larger consolidated wind farm developments. So that spilled over into criticism of policy, that the government had actually woken up quite late to the low carbon agenda. It was designing policies quite hastily, and some of those were not designed in a fantastic way, either for expanding the amount of renewable energy generation or in terms of managing the sorts of impacts it was going to have on host areas. The national planning policy framework as it existed at the time, biased the process towards approval, and it was seen by many as a winner-takes-all type process, regardless of the arguments, because the rules in the planning system at that time were strongly supportive of approval. And the local authorities sort of quite a lot of criticism levelled at Cornwall Council itself, because it was accused of having a lack of a vision and a lack of a coherent strategy for where wind energy was going to go within the Cornish landscape. In terms of the sorts of benefits, kind of views on benefits, there was kind of, I guess, more divided opinions. Again, I think all the opinions were divided, but particularly divided in relation to the sorts of benefits. There were those who were at one end of the spectrum saying, well, all the benefits are going to the landowner and to the turbine developer, and the local communities getting all the impacts and none of the benefits. There were others who have said, well, all the electricity, or significant proportion of electricity, in relation to the idea of self-sufficiency, is actually going up the national grid lines to power the rest of the country, and Cornwall was becoming an energy sacrifice zone for other parts of the country. On the other hand, most of the applications, or increasingly as we went through the process, local applications were accompanied by the offering of local benefit, community benefit funds, and they were seen as providing real advantages and real assistance to communities in achieving locally important, locally valued projects. There was also quite a lot of discussion around the sorts of model for developing onshore wind in Cornwall. The one model that the feed-in tariff perhaps encouraged a lot was private corporate developers working with individual landowners to promote a development. The alternative was the idea of community-led schemes, so organizations like REN, the Weybridge Renewable Energy Network. There was a lot of interest in community ownership, but limited uptake. And the couple of major reasons cited for that limited uptake, one of which was a concern about actually being able to meet via a community ownership type of model, the requirements of the developer, or particularly the planning requirements. And there was also a lot of concern that the financial return from smaller scale community owned projects was still not going to be profitable, still not going to be financially viable compared with the larger scale, economies of scale type commercial and utility scale projects. So the story of Cornwall's engagement with onshore wind has not been a happy one, or certainly not a universally happy one. The situation changed very considerably with the winding down of the premium payments, the feed-in tariffs, and also a new ministerial statement in June 2015, which gave communities a much larger say over the approval or otherwise of new onshore wind projects. And actually, if we're going to cut into the chase there, that actually meant pretty much the end of applications, or the end of successful applications for onshore wind within the Cornish context. Now, the reason, I guess, apart from anything else, for telling you some of this story is not to say that onshore wind energy is something which is inherently and automatically problematic, but it's to share with you some of the experiences and some of the considerations from the Cornish experience about the way a process was designed and the reasons why it became contentious, so that if Assembly members are supportive of onshore wind, then they are also informed by previous empirical experiences from a place that's not so far away. Thank you very much.